I have got a treat for you this week on the podcast. I'm joined by the most incredible woman, and I want to say that you need this episode whether or not you have a business, but because everything in life is heartful marketing. But if you own a business or if you are a founder or a leader of some sort and you also want to be marketing and sharing your work in the world, and yet you struggle to do so because it feels difficult, you aren't able to articulate yourself, or just feels like everybody is the same, then you absolutely need this episode in your life. Today, I am joined by Allison Canales, who is a conscious marketing mentor and medicine woman. Her work supports leaders in weaving artistry and ethical marketing to come alive online. Through a bold edge and fresh perspective, she elevates the voices of feminine visionaries and thought leaders to create unparalleled brands and businesses. Now, that is quite a bio, isn't it? It's representative of this incredible woman. And I want to say that if you are one of the many, many people who listen to this podcast or watch this podcast and then either let me know through a DM or in conversation or whatever that you love it because we have such interesting people, or I'm always interviewing or having conversations with people who are really interested and really interesting, then you also get to have those sorts of relationships in your life. One, by coming and joining the community, becoming part of the Maven Haven, whether that is the free Telegram group or the paid one, the Inner Circle, whether that's by coming to one of my community calls, or whether it is by reaching out on Instagram, on WhatsApp, on Facebook, on here, wherever you're watching or listening. Because that is where relationships start, right? In hand raising, in engaging, rather than merely being an observer. You get to be part of the conversation. You get to have interesting and interested people in your life. And the reason that I'm saying that right now is because of how I met Allison and how my life works in that way. I have the most incredible relationships with men and women in my life, and it wasn't always that way. Those of you who've read my book, Misfit to Maven, those of you who've been around a long time will know that for the longest time, I felt like a misfit. I didn't belong, I didn't fit in, I felt very alone. And now that couldn't be further from the truth. Now, as a two-line, I definitely still experience aloneness as somebody whose purpose, so unconscious earth, is gate 28. I definitely experience aloneness, and the way that we get to have fucking incredible, rich, intimate relationships is by being them, right? So enjoy the episode. In the next bit where I have Allison on screen, we'll kind of share how we met and how that came about. But all I want to say to you is engage, reach out to the people that you think are fun or cool or awesome, or that you may have something to offer, or you would like something. Like, just be human. Welcome to Adulting with Ebony, the podcast that, let's be honest, has evolved a lot over the last 7 seasons. Season 8 is still for creative, neurospicy, Gen X and millennial misfits who are becoming empowered, embodied, and fully expressed. It's for you if the intersection of the physical and mystical is your jam. This is the show where I actively encourage you to feel your feelings rather than think them. Glow up, not grow up, and become full of yourself, because who the fuck else should you be full of? Each week I have intimate, unfiltered conversations about what it takes to be fully resourced and have happy, healthy, rich relationships as a dopamine deficient adult. I'm your host, Ebony Allard, aka Ebony Alchemy, a late diagnosed ADHD, combined type Asperger's in case you love specifics, artist, mystic, and self-actualization facilitator. I'm an international award-winning multiple brain integration technique master coach with a special interest in embodied human design for neurodivergence. I've been in the personal development, creativity, and entrepreneurship spaces all of my life, and as a 5/2 emotional manifesting generator with left angle cross of distraction, I'm here to help you know what to trust and what to tune out. Each week, I share what you need to know, perspective shifting wisdom, and practical ways for you to feel safe, removing your camouflage for more belonging, acceptance, and fulfillment. Ready? Let's go. Hi.
Hello, I know it's been a while.
It has. And there's a level of familiarity and knowing that comes from kind of two things. And I'm sure we'll get into that. But like one for me is you're one of the very few people who have come and lived with me. And not many people know about that because I never talk about it, never advertise it. It's I have always had a telepathic open portal for grid working and or nomadic medicine women who need space, home, refuge. And there have been like maybe 20 women so far in my life who at various points have landed in whatever home or resource I have. And there's been some kind of powerful energetic exchange, which has been very restful. Can't talk to your experience, only mine, but for both of us. And you are one of those women.
Yeah, it was pretty, I feel like synchronistic because I remember putting out like, does anyone know anyone that has like a home in Europe or something that I can spend a few months at? And I feel like we had mutual friends or something like that, but yeah, very synchronistic. And then landing in your beautiful space was so lovely. And yeah, deeply restful for me to have a space to just like be in and cave out in.
Well, yeah. And so the other part of that kind of familiarity for me is meeting a 2/5 rather than a 5/2 and kind of having that like, in some ways we're really similar and in some ways we could not be more opposite, right? Like if your environment is caves and mine is mountains, there's that and there's a lot of like familiarity or like, oh, I see your teacher, medicine woman 5 voice and your hermit, leave me alone, I'm deep in my own solitude space, right? So yeah, that's my hi, welcome.
I love that. Yeah, the the part of me that's like, I am a leader, and I'll come out and I will teach, and then I will go in the cave and no one talk to me for a few weeks, and then I'll come out and do it again, and then go back into my like self isolation and like love every minute of it.
Well, yeah, and there's some other mirror pieces in there for me around also like deeply private life, but very open sharing, right? And like so many people are like, I do not understand this part of you. And then when you meet another 5/2 combination, and you're like, oh my God, you get it. I'm not hiding anything. I'm just keeping some passes of my life for me, right?
Yeah, I love that. I was thinking yesterday, because I'm like even separating some of my like social media accounts right now. So I have like my parents and like friends and family on one Instagram, like, and I was really feeling into this. I was like, I really just feel that privacy is like my greatest luxury. And it is kind of this funny thing because I find that there is a big perception of like, you share so much of yourself online. I feel like I know you. And then I always have a giggle where I'm like, there's so much that you don't know, not from a place of hiding, but like, that's like not for everyone's eyes. Like, that's like for me and yeah, for like really close people. And I, in a way, it's like a kind, not like an alter ego, but some ways I'm like, yes, I'm having a separation of like a little bit of who I am offline. Not that I am hiding or pretending to be anyone else, but that there's space for me to kind of just like take off leader role or teacher role and just be really present with like the intimacy of my life, which is not on a screen whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the pieces of real medicine and magic for me in being in your presence and witnessing
Mm,
how you do life is is all of that.
mm,
And then this tiny little voice in my head that's like, how the fuck does this woman who is 18 years younger than me on the physical plane like have her shit together like this? Right. And then there are other days where I'm like, well, I did then. It's only been falling apart since then. And so that, but there is also this like deep, deep reverence that I have for your combination of youth and wisdom, of
mm,
goofiness and seriousness, of like those beautiful contrary parts of you
mm,
that, you know, when we recognize, you know, the kind of what I see in you, I honor in me part of
mm,
medicine, right? Um, that. And
mhm,
part of my knowing of you before we'd even met
mhm,
was this like growing up
mhm,
in these circles, in the medicine, that the work is in the fabric of your skin, blood, being, and that it's
mm, mhm,
that you are, like I am in some ways, a spiritual being who finds the spiritual bit easy, and that
yeah,
the big human part is fucking complicated, and
yeah,
the bit that needs some like, hang on, I'm just trying to figure like, how does this bit work? What do I do with my body? Like, how do you do relationships? What am I talking about? Does that, right? Like all of those kind of bits. And that
yeah,
sometimes, not sometimes, quite a lot of the time,
mhm,
the bits of life that we find tricky or that we're really awkward at
mm, mhm,
end up being the bits that we teach or explain because they're fucking hard, right?
mhm, mhm,
And so more and more as I grow into my relationship with myself, like what am I here to communicate? What am I here to market? When I
mhm,
look at my maps, I'm like,
mm,
oh, it's really about like body and like the magic of the alchemy of the story of the whatever, like the body, right? Relationship.
mm,
And then when I look at you and your work, so
mhm,
much of it is around communicating a message.
mhm, mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and you know, it is, I think, funny because I feel like a lot of that communicating a message with something I say a lot with like precision and potency, or just like ownership of like the multi-dimensional layers of like our message, right? Because I think in a lot of traditional marketing, it's very like distilled down and it has to be this boxed up thing. And I know for myself, I was like, that just doesn't work for me. And I think that was kind of mirrored a lot also of my experience growing up of feeling like this kind of contrasting parts, right? This like, okay, how do I let this like youthfulness and like honoring that I'm still a maiden in so many ways and then have this deep wisdom and like not trying to rush out of the maidenhood because I only really get one in this lifetime. And yet I also like have a lot of spiritual wisdom and like bringing that with humility, but like, oh, how do these things coexist? And it feels too much and it's kind of weird. And like you said, the spiritual part comes, I feel like, so much more easily rather than like, I think my big work has been this deconstruction of like what is spirituality and also, you know, I'm still young and I like want to go to punk rock shows and like, you know, like and yet in a lot of circles it's like this is the way that it has to look and da 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 da. And I think a lot of that too with marketing in particular, I think it's echoes sometimes a similar tone in at least the spaces that I feel like I've been in marketing circles or from business coaches, where I felt like, not all of them, but it felt like this very stark difference of like, it was either so much energetics where it's like, okay, I know my brain needs some tangibility or else I'm like lost in the ethers. Or it was like, I was getting a lot of advice from people who had never really had maybe the depth of journey that like me and you have, or I think a lot of probably people listening have. And I was like, maybe as a Gemini, I'm just like, there's got to be room for both. Like there has to be a middle ground here, and the intersection of, yeah, what is that message where there can be that precision of language to a degree, and also a potency, because I think that was the biggest thing I struggled with, is like, how do I convey a message across that still holds the depth without it being like sucking the life out of it, where I just sound like an AI robot, or like some sort of like, yeah, bro marketing where it's like, this is the structure and this is the way it has to sound. um and yeah, I think because of maybe I feel like because of those experiences of having that spiritual experience, it's like I really get the holding of depth. And then there's some part of me that's either been trained, or I feel like it's also been a natural skill where it's like, where is the clarity in the message, and doing it in an embodied way? Because I
I
know for
see all of
myself,
that,
I'm
and
like, yeah,
I feel like there's also these two parts. There's way more, right, than this. Like
yeah,
the two parts of you that are the Gemini and the Sagittarian
yeah.
that are very similar also to me and different,
Mhm,
right? I have Sagittarius rising, Sagittarius moon, and then I have
mhm,
Gemini. My Mercury is in Gemini on my descendant in my
mhm,
sixth, seventh house, right? Like right on there. And so again, there's this like back and forth of keep it light, chat for the sake of chatting, right? Like sometimes we just
mhm.
chat shit and like giggle and laugh, and like it doesn't have to have
Yeah.
so much meaning to it. Why can't it just be fun, right? Let's just communicate in emojis and memes. Or like
Mhm.
I have this person I'm in a relationship with where hey means like 17 different things depending on like the energy
Yeah.
behind it, right? And like we can have a whole hey conversation,
Mhm.
the whole conversation. And I feel like in some ways that's very Gemini. And then there are other days where I'm like, give me your whole heart. I want everything, right? And the Sagittarius is like wants it all. And then also I'm like, no, enough
Yeah.
now.
Mhm.
Not that deep. And also, can I have some space, right? And so these like contrary parts of us are allowed to exist. And not only are they allowed to exist, like actually that range piece is the magic, is the potency, is the value, is the thing that is magnetizing, right? Is the
Mm.
contrariness. And I think when I say like, how did you figure this stuff out so quickly? I was so for such a huge amount of my life, I was like, I must choose. I cannot be this contrary. Like this meant this big, small, out there spotlight. Also, don't look at me. Like all of these different contrary parts of me. It would just my life would be easier, and everyone would understand me better, and I would belong if I could just fucking pick one. And what
Yeah.
I see you doing so beautifully is not picking one, is being it all, but like you said, like having this like precision and potency for what am I communicating right now.
Yeah.
And I think that that is really fucking cool for
Mhm.
the business people in the
Mhm.
space, right? Anyone who's listening who needs to communicate a message for their work, like that is really important. And I want to talk about it more, and then also like for you, like the way that you communicate it as art is
Mm.
so meaningful to me because I have finally reached this place of like, I'm running a business because I fucking have to, but actually my life is my art, my work is my art, like how I be is artistry, and
Mm.
I will be okay no matter what, and if I'm not, it's art, right?
Yeah.
And I think for those people who are listening but who don't have a business, or who are like, well, how does this relate to me? I don't need marketing, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
There's also just such beauty in that skill of being a woman and understanding the textures of communication that are for different things. And sometimes
Mm.
communication is for expression. Sometimes
Mhm.
communication is for beauty. Sometimes
Mhm.
for communication, right? Like do this, get it there, like
Yeah.
logistics, tangibles. And so I think like being a marketing artist, or like
Mhm.
really embodying your marketing or your message, isn't just about business. Actually, it is about everything that you've just talked about, but like owning your masculine and feminine, knowing
Mm.
when to hold and when to release, and being an integrated human who can be both wild
Mhm.
and contained.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, because I feel like, I often experience when a lot of clients come to me, it's like, yeah, we do talk obviously a lot about marketing because that's what most people are coming to me for. But I find a lot of the times too, it's like, like I was on a call yesterday with a client, and it's like it was connected to her expression and something that happened to her when she was a teenager. And it feels like when you really get to the root, I think, in my experience, not to say like this is like what it is, but I feel like in my experience and what I've seen over the years, it's like marketing is intimacy work, it's communication work, yeah, it's expression, it's vulnerability, it's like really, especially when you're doing something heart centered. And, like you said, if we're communicating to people, or, even like when you get dressed in the morning, like what are you wanting to communicate and express in the world? Or when you're in a relationship, what is the artful expression maybe that you want to express when you're in an argument? Is there like a way that you can do that in an artful way? And I think that's what I've always, come back to is, yeah, there's a real beauty, particularly as a woman, of where this like multi-faceted layers and dimensions and like flavors of what wants to come through. And yeah, I often say I feel like I really support people with like owning that part of them that feels too much, because I really feel like anytime I've seen a client or in my own experience had big growth in business, and it's kind of been effortless and not like this like I'm scaling and this is what's happening, but more of this like no, it just kind of blooms naturally, is when someone really owns that part of themselves that is too much. You're like, oh no, okay, I have to be like this. And then, okay, no, I have to be like this. Okay, wait, no, I'm in this. And it's really like, oh, can I just like feel into all these different textures and sensations of who I am, and build the capacity and like almost this fluidness of like, what is the art asking for in this moment of what expression wants to come through? And sometimes that's like my very sweet demeanor that I think naturally is very present. And then sometimes there's like a lot of boldness and, fiery tone, and less asking sometimes about what do I want this to be? What do I need to say? And I think that there's an element of that, but then I think there's also this like really juicy part where we start asking like, what is the art of this moment? Asking me to express, or like wanting to live through me. And like, I feel like a lot of, yeah, marketing or just expression work in the world for me has been like opening myself up to kind of get out of my own way, really integrate any like armor of what I think I need to be and present in the world, to let whatever's wanting to come through in that moment, be a gift to life, or in the case of business, kind of I think social media or marketing is kind of this digital altar too. So like giving it to the altar of life and being very intentional about that, as much as we would like in a temple space or any other sacred ceremony as well. And the same in life, right? Like what is the art asking of us in the moment? And sometimes that's not always what my brain wants. It's like, oh, it's like, let's say I'm yeah, in a fight with my partner, and there's like a big part of me that's like, okay, I'm feeling really jealous right now and like wanting to, like get mad at him or something. And then sometimes the artful moment is, for me, has as someone that can tend to be a bit more reactive, is like, maybe I can like playfully be like, oh, I'm so angry and this is how I feel, and just like kind of act it out in like a more playful way. But I think that expression work, or like enlightened drama, so to speak, can be this really beautiful way of expressing ourselves. Yeah, whether that's in business or in life or in relationship or even with ourselves.
There's so much richness and beautifulness in that. So this season and episode,
Mm-hmm.
where I'm building and the new body of work that's kind of blooming in me for the next, I don't know, 10 years or whatever, is really about becoming full of yourself, right? Because what should you be full of? And there's a book and there's the la, 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 like there's
Mm-hmm.
all of this stuff that wants to be expressed. And expression and creating content, stroke art, stroke whatever, has never been an issue for me. Like, one of the things that people have remarked on my whole life is like, you are prolific at
Mm-hmm.
expressing. And there's something in there around that piece of too much that you talked about, and what I see in most women, myself included, where there's been a socialization and a belief around restriction. I
Mm-hmm.
must be smaller. I must not ask for what I really want because that is too much. So I'm going to minimize it. And then when I won't get that, then I will feel disappointment, but I won't fully express my disappointment because, if I take my expression to its edges, it's too much.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of that I feel like I've worked with and healed and just allowed. And there's been a whole kind of very natural journey for me. And I think I see a lot of women, probably because there's a frequency match, who are in a place of healing the wounds of long-term restriction in how they communicate and how they eat and how they dress and how they, right, like all of these places where they've restricted. And I see this real resurgence of embodiment and or what, like, really being present in the now, like what's the art that wants to come through now, what wants to be communicated and expressed. But I still think there's a lot of confusion around strategy and organic expression.
Mm-hmm.
If I then make it personal, because I think that's probably a better way for us to get a tangible example, I know that one of the things that I want to focus on is potency. And given that I can create anything in any moment, you ask me something, I will respond. There's always something. There's got to be a way of producing less and expressing more. And what happens for me in that is that I get then in my head of like, what's the strategy? Like, the strategy is what will focus me, right? But then my design, I could talk about it with you, but then I'm in my head, which is not a center, right? Like, it's not defined, it's an open center. So I'm going to be in my not self. So truly the strategy has to be leading with my emotions of like, what do I feel like expressing? And then that kind of overwhelm, that back and forth of like, but puts me into the kind of, I'll just express something, right? Like, it's all leading generally to the same place. And when, if people know what they want, they'll come and ask me and then we'll figure it out. And one of the things that people say they want from me and have done for the last 10 years is clarity. And the other day I sat, like, everyone's like, oh, I just want clarity, I want clarity, I want clarity. And the other day I sat down and I wrote, like, journaled for 10 minutes on what is clarity. And the things that came through, and I then shared that as a post, but it was so powerful because what I actually got was clarity doesn't exist, right? What we have is a regulated nervous system, some kind of surety, stability, structure, right? Like, so we, every time we kind of come back to this back and forth dance between structure and or like what's the question and then the response, like, you know, this back and forth piece. And when you were talking and you mentioned enlightened drama, like, I love that. Like, that's it, that's the thing. And yet, coming to a question, I promise. If somebody is in that place of like, okay, I can do structure, and I can do like freedom and, you know, art, and I tend to bounce from one to the other, the middle ground feels really like either like I'm going to dilute something or controlled or contrived. Do you have a response to that? Like, is it a bouncing backwards and forwards? Is there some kind of middle ground? Like, what is your feeling around that?
Yeah. Yeah, I do have a response. I feel as if though, in my own body and the way that I typically guide clients is one, I feel like there's always a deconstruction that I have to start with, like, what is strategy? Because I think that it's become this funny word that I feel like a lot of us are like, okay, I kind of know what it is, or I feel like a lot of people come to me and they're like, this is what I believe strategy to be based on this, you know, from this business coach that I was working with 3 years ago. And for me, my definition of strategy is it's sacred direction. And I think it's a softer word sometimes than strategy. I still love the word strategy, but that's to me what it feels like. It's just bringing sacred direction to having the art have a little bit of focus. And I do think, like, for example, I think there's always room for abstract art, right? However, sometimes things do need to be, if we're like, let's say if you're like creating a collection, right? Or like a gallery, like there's a cohesive story being told, even though the pieces might be different. That's kind of a way to put it. So when I think of strategy and when I think of art, I think of it in terms of a conversation more than like 50-50, or like trying to get even in harmony or balance. Harmony is a better word than I think balance, because I think oftentimes, at least for my brain, when I think of balance, I often think of like the scales and it like needs to be 50-50 rather than where are they having a conversation with one another. And particularly when, you know, for example, something that I've been working on very intentionally and noticed first in my embodied knowing, I was like, wow, like my voice, like my physical voice, I want to do more with it, whether that's like, yes, something around that wants to come through more where I'm on video and people can like hear the frequency of me speak. So, right, a strategy, sacred direction might look like I'm gonna test out creating a podcast, or like I'm gonna, you know, create a space for me to just test out to see what would it look like, maybe to create more reels. And for me, whenever I'm playing with something new, I think that there is an important period of testing and playing around for people that maybe the middle ground feels scary. Because I think, if I know for myself, if I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try this new thing, and I'm like, okay, for 3 months it's gonna be three reels a day, and it's gonna be like this. I'm like, absolutely not. That's not freaking happening. Like, no, I'm gonna crash and burn, and my capacity is gonna be like, ugh, and then I'm gonna be like, I hate Instagram. I need a social media break. I'm done with the coaching industry. So I think that there needs to
An
be a little.
escalation, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's like always to that degree where I'm like, I'm never doing this again. I think I'm just gonna go like open up a flower shop. Bye, everyone.
Hello, you're two. Yeah. And for me, it's so fascinating because these things are reversed for us, right?
Yeah.
So for me, it's like I have had a podcast for like 7 years going on 8. I'm so comfortable using my voice.
Yeah.
Like, it's the thing I rely on. Like, I can anytime I want to make money, anytime I want
Mhm.
the first love, the first man that I saw across the like the first
Mm.
unobtainable person, I used my voice. I crafted that
Mm.
letter. I took it to him. I whispered in his ear. He took it to the bathroom. He came out
Oh
and
my
just
gosh,
said
I love
yes. And so I have known since the beginning of time, and then like left his girlfriend and came, blah, 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 right? I have always known my voice can do that.
Mhm.
The piece for me, and I guess this is fascinating, like back and forth on it. The piece for me is like how do I be in my two more? And so for you, like you're so comfortable in the like faceless or the like just coming out with one message from Hermit that actually for you, like being more in your five
Yeah.
is a push. Whereas for me, I'm like, it's the other way around. How do I be
Mhm.
in my two? Like, how do I communicate as profoundly without my five?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I love this question because it feels like I'm, yeah, asking the opposite for myself right now because I'm also going through this period where it's like, how can I be more offline than ever and more visible at the same time? And I think that that's where the strategy does help bring in that, containment of like, for example, right now I'm like noticing, I'm like, I don't want to be on Instagram as much. Like I'm like trying to hit a limit of like 25 minutes a day. Like I'm on there, I'm like posting the quality thing. But then I'm either deleting Instagram off my phone or respecting my little like phone boundary that's like, you've reached your limit, get off.
Oh, I love
And
that. I love that limit. And it talks to me and I go, no.
yeah, that's why I've started deleting it because I was like, I need to the physical act of deleting it. So it's like an annoyance to my brain to like have to go re-download it and then put it in my phone. So I think it's more of a conversation and I think it's less black and white too because I also like bringing in like I think that this is where we also the conversation of like yin systems come into play because I think sometimes a lot of in my perspective, I feel like sometimes there's this like echo chamber of like, oh, all systems are masculine. But then I start to think of like nature, for example, of like, it's a very yin system, it's like this very deep go into rest and now I go into yang. But like the overall system as nature is very yin, right? Like the mother energy. And something that I factor into a lot is like, when I'm coming up with a strategy, I'm really more doing that at the start of an equinox or the start of a solstice. And I look at, okay, first off, what are my life priorities? And I always start with that before my business priorities because I feel like if I'm not fulfilled in my health or my relationships, it doesn't matter how much money I'm making. It doesn't matter about the whatever K months. I don't care. So I always start with like, what am I really wanting to cultivate this season? And what do I have capacity for? So if it's in winter and I'm like, you know what, there's a big part of my heart's learning to like just make soup and read lots of books. So like, what is the structure that's also going to support my business because yes, financials is a part of that, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's like seasonality, or I know some people, if you're still menstruating, that can be a helpful system as well. But I think this is where it goes back to conversation. And again, more so being in the heart. Like, I think for me, it is really sometimes this very like what's needed today from me, rather than looking at it as this overarching like this is what needs to happen. Da, 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 da. And I think I feel like I don't strategize to a degree where it's so rigid. I like almost directional posts or like kind of reminds me of Super Mario where like you get to like a checkpoint and then you like have a checkpoint with yourself of like how is this going? Okay, do I need to pivot anything? So yeah, I guess that's my vague answer where I think it's like having a level of direction that
Mm.
there's room for you also to break rules. I think that's an important part too. to test things out and to be like, no, this needs to switch. Okay, I'm having a conversation. Oh, but I think also bringing in that seasonal direction as well. So it's not just this like open ended thing around like, if I have an intention, right, this season where I'm like, I want to be more visible, I'm not like looking at like, oh my gosh, I have to do that all for 2024. That feels so much, rather than like, this feels doable, and like a level of doability that's just pushing me enough out of my comfort zone. So I'm not like triggers all of my like, oh my God, it's scary to be seen wounds. And then I have to like do so much nervous system regulation to catch up with that.
I love that. I feel like you've articulated a lot of, or put language to a lot of the things that I do already and do naturally, and have
Mm-hmm.
never really been able to put that to, right? Like, so
Mm-hmm.
for me, strategy is like, so one of the things my clients have heard me say,
Mm-hmm.
if they have businesses, and even not, but if they have businesses, is what do you do for who and how, right? Like,
Mm,
really that simple. It's like, what is it that you are communicating,
yeah.
to who, and how? Like, how do you
Yeah.
want to communicate? Like, how does that want to be communicated? How does, for me, I know with my stuff, it's very much like, okay, well, this program, this body of work, this season, this whatever it is, has its own life force, has its own chi, and how does that want to be communicated? And then I just follow it, right? And
Yeah.
my work has led itself
Mm-hmm.
for most of my career, and there's definitely been my relational style and my own embodiment is, of course, in that, because how we be is how we be, and how we are doing ourselves is how we are doing ourselves in every area of our lives. Which leads me then to this bit about embodiment. So if you're talking about embodiment, is one of those buzzwords and overused words,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit like strategy right now, where if you say
Totally.
embodied marketing, right, someone on the other end of this is going, yeah, what? Like, what does that mean? And so I think that there's a little piece of explanation that we could give around, like, what does it actually mean to embody our communication?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think a good place to start, right, is I feel like a lot of people tend to market from the head, right? So, an experience I think a lot of people tend to have, right, when they're marketing from their head, as an example, is like, what do I post? What are the best posting times? It's so these heady base questions that I feel typically triggers a lot of this anxiousness, or right or wrong. Like, I need to get it right. And if I get it right, then I'll be good and then I will be successful. And as we both know, a lot of that times that doesn't end up working. And then we feel worse about our work, and I feel like tend to bring on this belief that's like, oh, we're not meant to be successful, or whatever that looks like. So I think my definition, particularly with embodied marketing, is dropping people out of their head, and more into, a lot of it for me is really womb based for feminine entrepreneurs, and really getting into like that depth of their wisdom, where there is more of a fluidness conversation, and they are in really taking up space in their whole body, and we're having conversations with their sensations. And a lot of those questions around, what do I post, da 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 da, da, is dropped down to a deeper layer of more sometimes parts work, or a lot of other healing and expression work more than anything. Because a lot of those heady type of questions almost become obsolete when we're really marketing from the body. And I feel like it's the best way that I feel like I can describe it on like almost like a, yeah, level, is where it's like that womb and the heart and like the throat are really connected, so that the voice and that instrument of the voice is also really speaking from like a deep wisdom, rather than this perceived, this is what I have to say to be good, or this is what I have to say to get clients, or like the most perfect clever copy, right, is gonna get all the clients where it's like, no, there has to be this very deep embodied wisdom, where also like the frequency and your energy and like who you're being on an energetic level speaks volumes too within your marketing. And that's also been my experience, right? It's like, and I would say like I have good copywriting skills, but I also feel as if though you can have the best copywriting skills and it can lack heart. And that's where that embodiment is felt, is like, it's that experience where some, like maybe you've experienced it, whoever's listening. I know I've experienced it, where I drop onto someone's page and I maybe read like a sentence, or I don't even read anything, but there's like a vibe, and that's that embodied frequency. Is like there's something about her, or there's something about this leader that is emotional resonance and speaks on an energetic layer, because messaging, I feel like, is like we communicate, one, obviously with our words, we're humans, but there's also this whole other layer of communication, which is frequency. And that's what I feel like encompasses embodied marketing, where we hold space for both physical words and then this like very frequency based language as well. And like honoring both are a part of messaging and marketing, not just one or the other.
Yeah. And from my add-on to
Mhm.
that, I think is that
Yeah.
so much of it is visuals as well.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
um most of the people who buy from me again and again and again, and for me, what I've learned over many, many years is that people often don't buy straight away.
Mhm.
Then they cross that threshold, and the traditional thing of like, we'll just sell them
Mhm.
something cheaper and then they will have bought, and then they will buy something else. That level of strategy
Mhm.
does not and has never really worked for me, because my people tend to at some point be ready, or at some point be trig enough, or at some point, find themselves doing whatever, the yes. And then once they're in, for a lot of them, and these kind of fall into two categories. One is the like, oh, I just saw you and said yes. And the other is, I've been following you for 4 years, never
Yeah.
put my hand up, and here we go, have 20K, right? But then they stay forever. And
Yeah.
when I say, what was it? Was it this page or this piece of copy or this or la la la? It is, it's all of those things, but
Mhm.
it's also none of them, right? Like very often it's like, oh, I skim read, or oh, I didn't read any of it, I just saw the pictures, or like, I just like the way you use your body, or and it's all of
Mhm.
those things.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so for me, there is really, in terms of embodied marketing, or like heartful marketing, so much of it is self-awareness. So much of it,
Mhm.
what is it that people are seeing in me that they are drawn to, that they want some of, or that they, that I'm actually exchanging.
Mhm.
And then like some of this, and this is where the coaching and the parts work and the healing and the medicine woman piece comes in, of like, and are you willing to accept money for that?
Mhm.
And one of my examples of that is like, people have been telling me that they love my courage, or that they, what want, or something around like my body or my relationship with my body for years. And I've been
Mhm.
like, but I can't have money for that, because I
Mhm.
must have money for the things I am clever at, not the things that come naturally to me, or like that I'm just doing for me, or that I don't feel qualified in, right? And so I think so much of this work, when people tell me, oh, I just need to get out of my own way, really what that means is like, can you heal the wounds that stop you from receiving in this yin way? And when you were talking about, nature being yin rather than yang, I'm like, well, if we were taking a yin approach,
Mhm.
we'd put a bucket on the floor and wait. And at some
Mhm.
points, and something of value would fall in it.
Mhm.
And gravity means that fruit falls off the tree. You don't have to climb the tree and pick it.
Yeah.
And I feel like even when I first learned, oh, I'm a manager, I still built a web, and then like I might have rested as a spider in a corner of my web, but as soon as I saw someone who might be coming in, I'd like run over to them rather than just being like, haha, they'll get stuck in the correct part,
Mm.
you know. And so there is this piece of like, can I back off further? You know, could I leave my web and let it
Mm-hmm.
do its thing? Right? You know, can I really just put a bucket on the floor, go and live my life, come back and be like, thank you, and carry on? And that's the piece of like embodiment or healing or medicine work that leads to and runs alongside the tangible, practical strategy
Yeah.
pieces, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I love what you said about that spider analogy, because I think it's such an also like trust that I think it's also trusting, right? And like allowing yourself the spaciousness to, I feel like I'm even experiencing that right now where I was like, can I be this offline and still like have the stability? And I'm like, it's really beautiful seeing the evidence of like actually it's more than possible, and to like lean back further. And I think that's also where it comes back to like that's always been a big value of mine. I'm like, I'm not here to create a like it's not that I don't love my business. I'm like, I love it and I'm doing a lot of work on it all the time in a lot of different ways, but a big value is living a life more offline. So can I be also very embodied in my own integrity of that value and trust that that's also supporting me to be in a deeper embodiment with myself? And in turn, I've experienced, and I see a lot of other people experience when they are in integrity with themselves, is like that's also helps with more of that attraction, because we're just in that, alignment's another kind of buzzword, right? But like a deeper alignment with our like soul integrity.
I love all of this. I feel like I have got a piece of wisdom and magic for myself today. So
Mm-hmm.
thank you. There's a piece of, and I can see it across the board, which is like, so, sometimes business coaches like to say things like, and if the money, like, why can't it come in tomorrow? Right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if 10 times or 100 times, let's say 100 times what you're currently making were to flow into the business, or 100 times more people were to flow into the business tomorrow, what would you be scared about?
Mm-hmm.
Like what would not work? That shows us where the holes are in our
Mm-hmm.
business, right? And what happens to me, and this is a perpetual thing, and I'm like, oh, that's fascinating as we talk, is I go, but everything's not perfect. Like there might be um they might get half a welcome sequence that I've not finished.
Mm-hmm.
They might
Mm-hmm.
not, something might happen where there might be a hole. I might have built half a web and there might be just holes in my web, right? And so there's somewhere that I don't trust that it will work or be good enough or professional enough or perfect enough, or whatever it is, unless I'm sitting by the side of it watching.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here if
Mm-hmm.
you need me. I'm here if I'm here if you need me. And there's that also shows up in a lot of my relationships of like, I'm here if you need me. I'm doing my own thing, but also I'm here if you need me. I'm like, okay, I am listening. I hear this. What would happen if I said, I'm not here if you need me? And there was a point in my coaching practice and in my life where I have, there's lots of levels where I've done bits of that already. And anyone who's ever emailed me and had the autoresponder that says I don't reply to email knows that that's true, right? Like there are levels and places where I have stepped further away and stepped further away. But it is fascinating as I'm like, okay, well, why could 100 times more money, more customers not come into my business tomorrow? It's because I'm building something and I just want to finish it before I leave. And then if I listen to what I said to you right at the beginning of this call before we pressed record of like,
Mhm.
what's going on in my life right now? It's like, I'm really, really busy because I just want to get everything finished before I take some time off. I'm like, okay, that is going to perpetually stay until I change it.
Yeah. 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 I feel like that was a huge realization for me. Like, yeah, even a few months ago, I was like, I do already have a lot of these things in place, but I'm like denying myself this really like potent desire and like holy desire. I'm like, I want to be offline even more. And oh, that's actually a little scary. And I found myself being like, oh, when I was in a launch. So I was like, I'm going to be on Instagram like 15 minutes a day and
Yeah.
that's it during this launch. And I'm like, wow, it's been the most successful. It's been the highest price point. It's actually been
Yeah.
the most easeful. I would even like in like I don't like the word lazy, but I would even say like a little lazy to an extent. And I'm like, but at the same time, right? It's that soul integrity of like, no, like I can start implementing that now, right? And it's not that you're not taking care of the things that you need to, but I think it is really beautiful giving yourself that gift of like, what is that holy desire? And like, yeah, values. Like, I think I'm really big on like, yeah, what are my values and like how do the actions I'm taking and the priority, like what I'm prioritizing, really match with that. And as soon as I like always shift back to that, it's like, all right, this is I feel good.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I love that. And my business is built on the value filter and it is all about that. And I feel like there are chapters in our lives when, the values don't change, but
Mhm.
the beliefs or the tangibles that are supporting those values, like do. There are times
Mhm.
in one's life where the value is freedom, and
Yeah.
freedom is um, not having a mortgage, being able to live wherever you want, renting Airbnbs. I mean, I don't know,
Mhm.
who does that, right? Um, there are other times in one's life where freedom is owning a property outright and la, la, la. And so there's little tiny shifts,
Totally.
and sometimes they are tiny shifts and sometimes they're massive shifts, but they're a paradigm shift, right? Or they're like a
Mhm.
fight, this little twist in attitude or orientation that have a big profound effect everywhere else. And I see with where I'm at in my life and the things that have transpired and the next chapter and moving into kind of the maid, the maven, or the, I don't know, whatever the
Mhm.
beyond queen part of my
Mhm.
cycle and my life. It's like, okay, this is a new chapter. And
Mm.
there are lots of women my age who have teenage children or children going off to university or kids that are in their 20s.
Mm.
And my version of that is, and they're mothering them and setting them free and mothering them and setting
Mhm.
them free, right? And my version of that is my business. My version of that is
Mhm.
like, it can run on its own. No, it can't. It needs me, right? And that like
Mm.
backwards and forwards thing of like, okay, are you willing to let it have some autonomy and make some mistakes on its own and learn to
Mm.
grow without you? And what will I even do with an empty nest or all this time or whatever it is? And so there is an interesting um, shift happening for me, and putting it into that context is
Yeah.
exciting rather than stressful.
Mm. I love that. Sounds really beautiful.
Thank you
You're welcome.
for your wisdom, your energy, your presence, and your
Mm.
time. If people want to come and find out more about your programs, your work, your art, your magic, where's the best place for them to come?
I feel like the best place is Instagram right now and my email list. I'm pretty frequent on there, and the email list is more like it kind of like educational blog style, sometimes behind the scenes of life. But I feel like for a good like taster to see if the work does resonate, Instagram's like a good place to have like a browse around. And if you resonate, then yeah, I would love for you to stay and say hi.
I love
Mhm.
that. And I think your work, your expression, how you show up in the world is absolutely exquisite. And thank you for
Mm,
showing up in your truth.
thank you. I appreciate that. Mm,
Mm.
this was so great.
Yes, I could talk to you all day, and I'm not going to because, other places to be, I must leave.
Yeah.